Today, we are at the heart of Congressional District 15 in the South Bronx, and we talk to Congressmember Richie Torres. Stay tuned for an insightful conversation regarding the issues that most affect the district, the city, and the nation. I am Javier E. Gomez. This program is brought to you from BronxNext's brand new state-of-the-art studios and educational center in La Central in the Hub. Join us as we welcome Congressmember Richie Torres. Bienvenido, señor.
It's an honor to be here.
A pleasure to meet you. Now, Congressmember, you just went on a great tour of BronxNext's brand new world-class studios, I should say. Please tell me about the experience, about what you feel after seeing this incredible facility.
Look, it's heartwarming that BronxNet, which is one of the jewels in the crown of the Bronx, has the world-class facility that it deserves. And it sends a powerful message that the Bronx deserves the same amenities, the same opportunities as the rest of the city. So I'm excited about the potential of BronxNet as an educational resource. And for me, we're entering a new chapter in the history of BronxNet.
What is the importance of a facility such as this one at a time in media history when mainstream media, traditional media as we knew it, is becoming more homogenized, more centralized, and local communities are becoming invisible?
Look, at a time of homogenization, it is more urgent than ever before to tell the stories of local communities in the Bronx, which historically have gone unheard and whose stories have gone untold. And so BronxNet plays an indispensable role in amplifying the voice of Bronx residents, because the Bronx is one of the greatest stories to tell, and we need as big a microphone to tell it, and there's no substitute for BronxNet, which is on the ground here in the South Bronx.
Growing up from humble origins yourself, what do you think is the impact of letting others tell your story, letting others carry the narrative of our communities?
Look, if you leave it to others to tell your story, then you become nothing more than a stereotype or a caricature or an abstraction. And so we in the Bronx have to be forward-leaning in telling the story, because we are far better, we're far more compelling than our reputation would lead people to believe. There are some people who have a 1970s Bronx is burning caricature of who we are, and so it's critical that we tell the story and the truth and set the record straight.
Pivoting into other topics, Congressman, this is the first time I have a chance to meet you and talk to you directly, and I have always been a little intrigued.
My condolences.
No, I'm actually very enchanted to meet you. I've been a little intrigued always to ask you, what are your thoughts about taking your first year in Congress? You're relatively new to Washington, and also you following in the steps in a Congress seat that is so nationally known, stepping in the shoes of Bobby Garcia, Jose Serrano. These are very iconic Congress members.
Look, I represent what is arguably one of the most iconic congressional districts in America, the South Bronx, and the South Bronx has a half-a-century tradition of Latino representation, Puerto Rican representation, and so it's not lost on me that I stand on the shoulders of giants. When Jose Serrano became the member of Congress for the South Bronx in 1992, I was only 4. And so my ascension to Congress represents a new generation of leadership, a genuine passing of the torch. And so it's the greatest honor of my life to represent the people of the South Bronx, which I proudly call home.
What have you discovered are the biggest challenges of working in Washington and representing this community in Washington?
Look, Washington is a long game, and it can take time to pass legislation. And it's much more ideologically diverse than what you would find in the City Council. In the City Council, just about all of us are Democrats. We hold the same values and the same views. In Washington, D.C., I serve with colleagues whose vision of America is radically different from mine, whose district's needs are radically different from mine. And so it just takes much more time to go through the legislative process and to enact change. My experience in Congress has been unusually eventful. I was sworn in on January 3rd of 2021, and then on January 6th, I saw firsthand an invasion of the U.S. Capitol. If someone had said to me when I was 13, Richie, you're going to become a member of Congress during a global pandemic, and then witness an insurrection against the U.S. Capitol, and then vote to impeach the host of The Celebrity Apprentice, and all of that would happen within the first 2 weeks, I would have said that sounds more like a movie than real life. So it's been an unusually eventful year. And then just a few months ago, I lived through the longest speaker vote in 164 years. It took 15 rounds of voting for the Republicans to select Kevin McCarthy as Speaker. So it's a time of unusual turmoil in Washington, D.C.
I hear people throwing around the statistics. Bronx Congressional District 15th is the poorest in the nation. Is that statement still accurate? And do you have any feelings about that?
You know, it's often said that the South Bronx is the poorest congressional district in America, which is factually true. We do have heavy concentrations of poverty. But I have a more nuanced view of who we are. You know, the experience of COVID has shown the South Bronx to be the essential congressional district of America. You know, during COVID, we saw essential workers from places like the South Bronx put their lives at risk during the peak of the pandemic so that the rest of the city could safely shelter in place. And so our city could not succeed and survive without the essential contributions of the workers who disproportionately live in districts like mine, in districts in the Bronx. So I think of the South Bronx not as the poorest congressional district in America, but as the most essential.
Providing a little overview about the district in itself, what do you think are some of the most pressing issues right now?
Look, we have families who are struggling to put food on the table and pay their bills in the face of record high inflation, the worst inflation that we've seen in more than 4 decades. My greatest passion is affordable housing. You know, according to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, there's not a single county in America where an essential worker earning minimum wage could afford a 2-bedroom apartment. And out of 3,000 counties, there are only 7 counties where such a worker could afford a 1-bedroom apartment. And here in the Bronx, we have families who live in fear of displacement and eviction and gentrification. And so my highest priority is to secure more funding for affordable housing in places like the Bronx, and in particular for public housing. You know, public housing has been so chronically underfunded that it has a capital need of $40 billion and counting. And so we need to secure billions of dollars in new funding to replace the broken elevators and boilers and roofs and bricks in public housing.
Any thoughts on gentrification as the South Bronx experiences this remarkable renaissance?
Well, I'm excited that the South Bronx is undergoing a renaissance, but we have to ensure that it works for the people of the Bronx. Like, we have to pursue development without displacement, that the people who have historically called the South Bronx home have a right to live here and should be able to afford their home.
You recently made some statements regarding the failure of Signature Bank and its impact upon more than 80,000 home units. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So as you know, there's been a wave of bank failures, including Signature Bank. Signature Bank happens to be the 3rd largest residential lender in New York City, with a multifamily portfolio of about 80,000 units, a significant share of which are here in the Bronx. And I have, you know, normally the FDIC would sell the real estate portfolio to the highest bidder, but, you know, these are not typical assets. These are people's homes. So we want to ensure whoever purchases the debt is committed to preserving affordable housing. And so I persuaded the FDIC to form a working group with New York State and New York City housing officials to ensure that the debt is sold to someone who's committed to preserving affordable housing. We have to preserve the affordability of those 80,000 units.
This makes me think about the banking crisis, Congressman. You have been in Washington, in the room where a lot of things happen. How did we get here?
The banking crisis? Well, the starting point was the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. You know, when the Federal Reserve began raising interest rates, long-term assets like treasuries become less valuable, which leads to revenue losses for banks like Silicon Valley Bank. And what was unique about Silicon Valley Bank is 90% of their deposits were uninsured. So it was unlike any bank in America. And once a bank fails, the financial panic almost is like an infectious disease. It can spread rapidly and widely throughout the system. It can cause a wave of bank failures. And so it's important for the government to intervene immediately and to contain the financial panic and prevent it from spreading more widely in the system. And that's what explains the actions that we took at the federal level. And we have not stopped the financial panic, but we've slowed the spread of financial panic in the system.
Some people in the district do not understand exactly how does the banking crisis manifest in their daily lives. You have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, on a few. First, it matters to you as a depositor, right? When you put your money in a bank, you want to be confident that it's safe, that you can redeem your deposit, you can get your money whenever you need it. So it matters to all of us in that sense. But also, the businesses that employ us depend on banks for their financing. And if banks fail, it means employers no longer have money to operate their businesses, which will lead to unemployment. So the economic growth depends on access to capital, access to credit, access to financing, which heavily comes from banks.
Congressman, talking about banking, now more at the customer level. I know in the district there's been a challenge of people of low income and middle income even having access to the most essential basic banking services to be functional in modern day society. What has been done about that and how is the situation?
Look, we have to ensure that places like the Bronx have access to affordable and reliable banking services in order to reverse the legacy of redlining, which excluded communities like ours from access to banking. But even if you have access to a bank account, we have to protect people from exploitive fees, overdraft fees that disproportionately affect communities of color. One concern I have is the predatory impact of check cashing fees. These check cashing fees charge Bronx residents what I would consider to be predatory fees in order to transfer their own money to their loved ones abroad, right, through programs like remittances. The New York City Department of Consumer Affairs once found that low-income New Yorkers spend $200 million a year on check cashing fees. And those New Yorkers disproportionately come from places like the Bronx. And so we need affordable alternatives to the predatory check cashing fees that exist throughout our borough.
We have a very limited time with you, and I would need 3 hours to really ask you everything I'd like to. So I'm going to move along fairly fast here. The environment is a big topic in this district. Once used to be known as Ma Alley all around the nation. In terms of the environment, what is happening? Where are we now these days?
Well, we passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which are the largest investments in clean energy in the history of the United States. It's projected to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030. And for me, it's not only about the environment, it's also about public health. Every day to and from the Hunts Point Terminal Market, there are about 15,000 diesel trucks that travel back and forth. And those diesel trucks create massive congestion on the Cross Bronx Expressway, unleashing massive quantities of air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. And if you're a young kid from the Bronx who lives near the Cross Bronx or attends school nearby, you're breathing in through no fault of your own pollutants that cause you to have respiratory diseases like asthma. Right? It's no accident that the South Bronx has the highest rates of asthma hospitalization in the country. And so I have a vision for capping the Cross Bronx Expressway and installing filters that would prevent air pollutants from recirculating in the air and poisoning the quality of the air that our children breathe. I think air quality is a human right, and we must do more to improve it here in the Bronx.
When we return, we continue our conversation with Congressmember Richie Torres from BronxNext Studios in La Central in the Bronx.
We built a media network for you.
BronxNet TV.
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College,
At Mercy College. And in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on BronxNet.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at BronxNet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. BronxNet TV.
From the Bronx
To the world.
BronxNet.
Welcome back. This is In the District, and we're talking to Congressmember Richie Torres from Congressional District 15th in the South Bronx. This program is brought to you from the district in the hub at BronxNet's Educational Center and new studios. Before the break, we were talking about environment and the Cross Bronx. What is the status of that project now?
So I partnered with Senator Chuck Schumer, the majority leader, to secure funding to conduct a feasibility study to determine what it would take, how much would it cost to cap the Cross Bronx Expressway. So New York City DOT is in the process of administering the feasibility study, which is a multi-year process. But we are at the study phase of implementing the vision for capping the Cross Bronx.
Another big issue in people's minds these days is the situation with the migrants.
Yeah.
I know you recently sent, I think, a letter,
Yeah.
right, requesting that work permits be expedited for them. Can you tell me a little bit about that proposal and why do we need it?
So there's been an unprecedented wave of migration that has swept New York City. It's put enormous strain on the shelter and social service infrastructure of our city. About 70,000 migrants, 45,000 of whom are presently in the care of New York City. You know, it's important for us to remain a sanctuary for immigrants across the world who are searching for a better life, particularly asylum seekers who are fleeing persecution or humanitarian crisis in their homeland. But for me, the main issue is that these families who are coming here want to work, want to support their families, want to contribute to the economy, and there's no point in denying them work authorization. So we've called upon President Biden to grant the asylum seekers here in New York temporary protected status, TPS, in order to enable them to work and to contribute to the economy and to their own families.
Any thoughts about people who might fear that these people will be taking jobs from local residents and citizens?
Quite the opposite. The American economy is built on immigrant labor. Like whole sectors of the U.S. economy, from construction to healthcare to agriculture, would collapse without immigrant labor. Like the healthcare that we access, the food that we eat, depends on the invaluable contributions of immigrants. So far from threatening our jobs, it enables us to live fulfilling lives as Americans.
Thinking long-term, Congressman, what can you say about the sustainability long-term of what's happening with the migrants? For New York City, but also towns across the border.
Look, ultimately the wave of migration is a symptom of our broken immigration system, which can only be fixed by Congress. You know, we, the Democrats, are committed to fixing our broken immigration system, but the Republicans would rather demagogue the issue of immigration to score political points, right? There are political figures like Donald Trump who have built their identities around our broken immigration system and who have a vested interest in keeping it broken. And so politics is standing in the way of problem solving.
In your opinion, how can we solve this? What can be done? What do we need?
Look, we need comprehensive immigration reform, and we need an orderly process by which we can receive asylum seekers. We cannot have governors like Abbott and DeSantis move immigrants around like musical chairs and approach it politically. We need an orderly process by which we can provide sanctuary to asylum seekers who are coming here for a better life.
Another topic in people's minds these days is the debt default. Yeah. I know that's probably a big headache for you. Where is this topic now?
Well, nothing is more important at the moment than raising the debt limit, which means paying our bills. Just like every household and every business in America is expected to pay their bills, the federal government should pay its bills. And if we were to default on America, if we were to breach the debt limit, it would represent a catastrophe. The Bronx alone would lose thousands of jobs. We would lose millions of jobs nationwide. It would cut the stock market in half. It would represent a nightmare for every household and every business in America, because the full faith and credit of the United States, the credit worthiness of the United States, is the foundation on which everything else is built.
We only have a few more minutes with you, and I really would not want to let you go without talking a little bit about Richie Torres, the little boy growing up in the Bronx. Tell me a little bit about your upbringing here in the borough.
Well, I'm born and raised in the Bronx. I happen to be a twin, so my brother and I are 5 minutes apart. In the late 1980s, my mother was watching the movie La Bamba, and she was inspired to name me after Richie Valens. That's why I'm Richie with a T, R-I-T-C-H-I-E. And she named my brother after the Reuben sandwich. from which I infer that I'm the favorite son.
Very creative.
So, but born and raised in the Bronx, and I would not be where I am today were it not for my mother. When I won my primary in June of 2020, I publicly said that before I was a congressman or a councilman, I'm first and foremost the son of my mother, Deborah Bosselet. And for me, what's so satisfying is that I represent a borough that is full of single mothers like mine who have sacrificed and struggled and suffered so that their children and grandchildren can have a fighting chance at the American dream. So I love to represent a borough, a congressional district full of powerful mothers like mine.
What are some of your favorite spots in the district and in the borough?
So I live in a house right across the street from Fordham University, and there's a nearby pizza shop, Pugsley's, whose owner, Sal, is full of personality. So it happens to be my go-to pizza shop. And then I'm right next to Arthur Abbey Italy, which has some of the best Italian restaurants in the country, like Enzo's and Zero Tonove and Roberto's. So I'm well fed as a member of Congress.
Yeah, you never go wrong with Little Italy.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. Now, in terms of legacy, how do you want to be remembered? What would you want your legacy to be?
I want to be remembered as a fighter for my home, the Bronx. I want people to know that even when I leave the Bronx for Washington, D.C., the Bronx never leaves me. It's core to who I am. It's encoded in my DNA. And I will fight for the Bronx, always have fought for the Bronx and always will.
Any thoughts about your upcoming months in Washington?
Look, I hope that once we pass the debt ceiling extension, we can go back to solving problems that affect everyday people. But I'm hoping that the Democrats will win control of the House in 2024 and will make Hakeem Jeffries the first person of color to serve as Speaker in the history of the United States. We're on the verge of making history, and that makes me excited.
Thank you, Congressman. I look forward to continuing this conversation. It's very interesting.
Absolutely.
And thanks also to the entire team at BronxNet for making this program possible. We hope this is the first of many visits to this remarkable television and multimedia technology facility right here in your district. Thanks everyone for watching, and remember that you can always watch this program anytime, anywhere on BronxNet.org and also BronxNet's channel on YouTube. You can also share the link with others. Make sure to follow BronxNet on social media to find out what will be the next location and district in the next edition of In the District. See you soon.